Thanks for joining me today for our 8th daily devotional in our series on the parables of Jesus in Luke's Gospel. As Jesus journeys towards Jerusalem, there seem to be three main groups listening in on his parables. There are the lost crowds, often identified as tax collectors and sinners. There are the religious elite, usually Pharisees and experts in the law of Moses. And Jesus' disciples, those who are following Jesus, committed to learning him and his ways. Today's parable in Luke 16, 1-9 is directed at that third group, at Jesus' disciples, and it challenges them and us to use everything and every opportunity for the sake of the kingdom. But it all happens in a kind of a roundabout way. So let's turn to Luke 16. Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and he asked him, "What's this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer." The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings." Now, there's a lot going on here, and the interpretive key clearly is in verses 8 and 9. Now, we introduced this idea yesterday that we need to interpret the meaning of Jesus' parables beginning with the key that he provides, the interpretive key. And that's very often the landing point or the concluding statement of the narrative. Whatever this tricky parable means, verses 8 and 9 are going to make it clear. But before we get to that, first of all, I think we should notice that in Jesus' story, both the manager and his master are slightly dodgy. Neither one of them is righteous or a godly Jewish person. Most certainly, we should not equate the master with God or Jesus. That would be not only overly simplistic, but contrary to the whole run of this story. We know that the manager is dodgy because he uses his position as manager of his master's wealth for his own personal benefit. He shores up some kind of future for himself on his master's dime. He's shrewd in doing this. That word shrewd only appears here in the New Testament, and our best understanding of the word would equate to sneakily and wisely advantaging yourself. There's a kind of begrudging admiration for the manager's creativity in looking after his own interests, even though it might be ethically questionable. So this manager is just a bit dodgy. But so is his master. How so? Well, it was against the law of Moses for Jewish people to charge other Jewish people interest, or perhaps unreasonably high interest. We could see that in Exodus 22 and Leviticus 25 and Deuteronomy 23. In Jesus' day, though, it was not unusual for people to get around that law by calculating interest in terms of market goods, like olive oil or bushels of wheat. The writing and rewriting of bills here was the manager removing the interest charges to the debtors. He was suddenly being scrupulously honest and law-abiding at his master's expense, and thereby winning friends for himself. So our first observation is both the master and the manager are a bit dodgy. They are worldly people acting according to the principles of this world. Neither of them are good guys offering a shining example for disciples. Their behaviour is not directly transferable to the Christian. Second observation is that the manager's time is short. He knows that his whole world is about to change dramatically, and he has to act quickly to make friends for himself beyond his current situation. The setting of the parable, therefore, is transferable to the Christian. The disciple of Jesus knows that the kingdom of God is breaking in, that their world is about to dramatically change. There is an urgency to their actions. The third observation, I think, is the goal of the shrewd manager. He wants to make friends and be welcomed into their homes. He uses his current opportunities to maximize his future benefit. So with those quick observations in mind, we now arrive at Jesus' interpretive key, verses 8 and 9. The first sentence of verse 8 is the conclusion to the parable. The word for, which could also be translated because, marks this transition where Jesus steps out of the story to begin his teaching. This lesson begins with a comparison. The people of this world are much more shrewd than the people of the light. It's interesting, Jesus doesn't immediately call the people of the light the people of the next world, and yet the contrast is clearly intended here. The people of this world are darkness. The people of the next world are light. And in fact, at the end of verse 9, the word for eternal dwellings is clearly a reference to the dwellings of the new age, the eternal kingdom of God. Next thing to really take note of is that the form of Jesus' teaching here is a comparison teaching. It's a how much more comparison. If worldly people are good at gaining future advantage for themselves in this world, how much more should the people of the new age be acting for future advantage in the kingdom of God? And so Jesus' direct instruction in verse 9 makes sense of all of this when he says, look, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. And Jesus is not calling his disciples to use wealth dishonestly. He's not setting up some kind of buy your way into heaven scheme, either by using your wealth to buy your own way into the kingdom or by buying your friend's way into the kingdom. No, he's not doing that. Instead, I think he's saying that the disciples should be clear-sighted and wise and purposeful in using whatever wealth they have now in a way that will be for the future benefit of the kingdom. Remember the time frame? The manager knows his time is short, and so he acts quickly for the sake of his future. So putting that all together, there's the key. The principle that we need to take away is that disciples should be very clear-sighted and purposeful now to use whatever is at their disposal now to maximize the growth of the kingdom of God, and they should be urgent about this. When we understand the parable in this way, Jesus' follow-up teaching then in Luke 12 kind of makes perfect sense. He then goes on to say, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So what wealth or resources or skills or abilities or opportunities has God given us? What's he putting us in charge of? What do we manage now on God's behalf? We know the time is short and that the kingdom of God will arrive when it's least expected. So knowing this, how can we gain maximum advantage for God's kingdom in the future with all that is at our disposal today? So what do we manage now on God's behalf? How might we gain maximum kingdom advantage from that now?